sitting there in the quiet, and he's looking at this feeding trough, and all of a sudden it hits him that our Savior came and laid in a feeding trough. And it made me bawl, because how often do we sit and look at what the humbleness that God really came in? I know the cry of people's hearts this year is, God, won't you fix it? It's such a mess. The world is such a mess. Won't you fix it? You know, for 400 years, the world cried, won't you come? You think God doesn't hear our cries? He did the first time. God had me on this tangent for the past few weeks of comparing the first coming of Christ to the second coming. The world looks very similar. In fact, if you go to Isaiah chapter 9, which prophesies the coming of Christ, we'll start at verse 1. But there will be no more gloom for those who are in anguish. But in the midst of judgment, there is this promise and the certainty of the Lord's deliverance. And there will be no more gloom for her who is in anguish. In the former time, the Lord brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the later time, he will make it glorious, and by the way of the sea of Galilee and the land beyond the Jordan and the Galilee of the nations. Verse 2, and the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. And those who dwelt in the land of intense darkness and the shadow of death, upon them has the light shined. The world before the first coming of Christ was very, very dark. 400 years of silence spiritually. Sometimes I look at our world now and I see that. There is this spiritual darkness that has come on the world. Nobody knew the exact year or the day per se, but the Essenes who had studied out the year knew that it was 490 years from the prophecy that Christ would come, the Messiah would come. So Anna and Simeon, and I've taught on this before, Anna and Simeon were actually at the temple waiting for the coming of Christ and for his birth, because they were part of the Essenes and knew the approximation of Jesus' birth. Even though they didn't know the exact day, they knew approximately when it was going to be. In the second coming, nobody knows the day or nor the hour, but Jesus said, you'll know the season. In the first coming, they didn't know the day nor the hour, but they knew the season. And in the second coming, you'll know the season. You may not know the day, the hour, nor the year, but you will know the season. How? Because the world will look very similar. The darkness will come, but there will always be a light. And a great light that shines and dwells in the land. When Jesus first came, he came to a humble stable in Bethlehem. He was laid in a feeding trough. That still gets me. Sometimes you don't really understand that until you're facing it. Wow, this is actually where Christ was laid. He wasn't laid in some big comfortable bed, you guys. You know, when we first have babies, we're very medical minded. We want to have them in a very clean hospital and stick them in a very, very clean. Everything's about cleanliness. The original births weren't like that. Now, the good thing is Christ was born in the lamb area where they gave birth to the lamb, so it was clean. It wasn't that it wasn't clean, but he was laid in a feeding trough. Have you guys ever been around animals? There's a level of cleanliness, but you have to really work at it. I've kind of had to deal with this puppy thing this year. We had puppies September 1st. They were born. And, the first couple weeks, Mama cleaned up after them. Then it got to the point where Mama couldn't clean them anymore, and I had to do the cleaning. And let me tell you something. 5 puppies makes a lot of mess. One puppy is a little easier. Now that I finally am down to one, it's a lot less mess. But 5, holy cow. And I think, I can't imagine trying to keep the animals clean so that you can give birth to a baby in there. That all makes sense to me. Jesus was born in a remote stable in Bethlehem. In the second coming, he will come in the clouds of heaven with power and with great glory. And every eye will see him. In the first coming, you simply had Simeon and Anna and the shepherds, and eventually the wise men and his parents were the only ones that really knew of his coming. Bethlehem, even though Bethlehem was named in the prophecies, Bethlehem slept through the first coming. They didn't even notice. Now, I don't know about you, but when the shepherds actually, at one point, the shepherds went door to door. Nowhere is it recorded that other people went and worshiped Jesus after the shepherds went and told them. Not only was Bethlehem asleep physically, they were asleep spiritually. Do we pay attention when people go door to door to minister Christ to us? That he's come? Or do we just keep going on our way? That's kind of the world we live in right now. It's dark. And it's asleep. You can go and minister.